In this video, we will talk about the mechanism of absorption. And to understand this, we have classified this mechanism into two phases. That means the way elements get absorbed is completed in two phases. The first phase is rapid movement of ions, into the free space of the cell. And what exactly we mean by this free space is through apoplast. So this actually means apoplast movement. What exactly is this apoplast? In order to understand this, suppose we make these few plant cells here, and between these plant cells they share their cell walls. So here are the cell walls that we are drawing. And if water along with the minerals is coming from the soil, then the movement is in the free space. Now this free space can also be written as outer space because we are talking only about the cell wall. That means the minerals would come into the cell wall. The blue line which we have drawn is the plasma membrane. So this blue line represents plasma membrane and this red layer represents the cell wall. So now water comes into the cell wall and it moves through the cell wall of one cell to the other, and finally it would come into the xylem. That means the movement of minerals is taking place through the outer space or through this free space, and that is why we call it apoplast movement. This movement is rapid, it is very fast, and it is into the outer space. We can also explain this as movement of mineral ions without crossing a membrane. That means they are not going into the cell, they are not crossing plasma membrane, or they do not become a part of the solution. So they simply move from cell wall to cell wall and ultimately reach up to the xylem, from where it will be conducted upwards along with water. This rapid movement we are talking of in the first phase is passive, it is rapid, and when we say passive, it does not require any ATP, and it is according to concentration gradient. That is from higher concentration to low concentration. That is according to the concentration gradient. It is a passive movement, no ATP has been spent. The mineral ions, they move from higher concentration, that is from soil, to the lower concentration, that is in the cell wall or along with water, and it is a very fast movement. This is phase 1. In the second phase, it is slow movement. It is a slow movement of elements through the inner space. And inner space, that means now it is going into the cell, and this movement is also known as symplast. It is slow as compared to the first phase. Second, it is with expenditure of ATP. That means it is an active process. ATP is required. And because ATP is required, it can take place against concentration gradient also. Let us draw a similar diagram here to understand how the first phase and the second phase, they are different. Again, this blue line which we have drawn is the plasma membrane, and these cells have their cell walls. So now let us see what exactly happens in case of the second phase. Again, the minerals are coming from the soil. In first phase, those minerals went through the cell wall without crossing plasma membrane. Now these elements entered into the cell. That means they have crossed the plasma membrane and have gone into the inner space, that is inside the cytoplasmic content. And again, from one cell to the other through plasmodesmata, from here to here, and ultimately this mineral ions, they would also reach the xylem. So the difference between the two phases: first phase, water comes in, along with it the mineral ions also come in, and they move through the cell wall without entering into the cell. This is known as the free space or the outer space, that is only the cell wall part. And this is also known as apoplast movement. It is fast because it is going as per concentration gradient, and no energy is required, so it is a passive process. Then the movement takes place through second phase, that is active movement. It is going to go through the cells. That means these elements will become part of the cytoplasmic content. They will cross the plasma membranes, and from one cell to the next cell through the connections between these two cells, that is plasmodesmata, and finally it would reach to xylem. And again, whether it is first phase or second phase, through xylem, once it reaches the xylem, then it would be conducted upwards with the help of transpiration pull. So the differences are in the pace with which it moves, expenditure of energy or it doesn't take place, and which is that area through which these ions are moving. Only through the outer space, and this is through the inner space. Now, this is how we classify this mechanism. Let us talk about one more term which is called flux. Term flux is used for movement of ions. When ions are moving, then we call it a flux. And this flux can be divided into two categories. That means if the mineral ions or minerals are moving into the cell, that means if they are going in or if they are going out, then we give two different terms. Movement of ions into the cell will be known as influx, and movement of ions out of the cells is known as efflux. So flux term is given for the movement, and if these minerals, they are moving in to the plant cells or tissues, then it will be called influx, or if they are moving out, then it is known as outflux. In this same category, the mechanism of absorption is also classified as active absorption and passive absorption. So let us take that in detail now. Let us classify this process now as passive absorption and active absorption. Now, when we are using the term active and passive, it is energy related. Passive means there is no energy requirement, and active is always with expenditure of ATP or energy. The passive absorption can be again discussed under further heads. The first theory which was proposed was mass flow theory. That means absorption of these mineral ions takes place along with water. So this indicates absorption of minerals with water. So when water is taken in, these elements or these minerals, they are taken along with it. That theory is mass flow theory. The second theory which was proposed in this category of passive absorption is of ion exchange theory. Exchange theory. And under this, we'll take two. That is one, in case of what exactly happens in the soil, say we draw a root here and this is a soil particle. Soil particle and this is the root. Actually, absorption takes place through root here, but just to simplify that diagram, we are drawing the root here. Roots release hydrogen ions and the soil particles, they possess potassium ions. It has been explained, or it is believed by the scientists, that these ions, they are not stationary. They show oscillating movement. So suppose this is hydrogen and it is moving. This is the oscillating path of hydrogen. That means this hydrogen is moving on this path. Similarly, potassium also has an oscillating path and this potassium is moving in this path. Let us make these arrows little clear. So these are the paths in which these ions are moving. Now a situation comes that hydrogen and potassium ions, their oscillating paths, they overlap. Then up till now, if we don't have this potassium, hydrogen is going to oscillate in its own path and potassium is going to oscillate in its own path. But if their paths get overlapped, that means here is hydrogen and here is potassium. Then they change their path. That means potassium is going to come here and hydrogen is going to go here. And if potassium comes here, then it is taken by the root hair. And this is what is meant by ion exchange. And these lines which we have drawn, these are oscillating paths of these elements. So what scientists believe, or what they explain how this absorption is taking place, is that there are some positively charged ions which are released from the root. Similarly, the soil particle also possesses these. We have just said that soil is the reservoir of all these elements. So soil also has positively charged ions. When positively charged ions of root and soil, they share or have overlapping oscillating paths, then these ions get exchanged in that path and ultimately potassium would go into the root hair and then ultimately into the plant through xylem. The second example that we take in ion exchange is of bicarbonate ions. That means absorption of some positively charged particles would take place with the help of these ions. Again, let us draw this root here. Roots, the cells of the roots, they respire and they release carbon dioxide as a process of respiration. Respiration is taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide reacts with water which is present in the soil to form carbonic acid. This carbonic acid dissociates into H plus and bicarbonate ions. And again, here is our soil particle. And this soil particle has potassium ions. And these two, that is bicarbonate ions and potassium ions, they react and they form potassium bicarbonate. And this potassium bicarbonate is now absorbed by the root hair. And here also it is due to ion which is moving, but there is a difference. Here there is an exchange between two positively charged ions or two cations. One gets exchanged from the other one, but here it is both positively charged. Here one negatively charged ion and one positively. That is one cation, one anion. They combine to form a salt, and then this compound is taken in by the roots. So these two examples are taken under ion exchange theory. The third one under passive, first one was mass flow, second was ion exchange. The third is written as Donan's equilibrium, named after the scientist who explained. What Donan said, that inside the cells there are some non-diffusible ions. So according to him, movement of ions is due to some non-diffusible ions. To understand this, let us take a simple example, and then we will write down the equilibrium equation. Suppose this is a cell and this is the membrane. This is inside and this is the outside of the cell. Inside the cell, say there are few non-diffusible anions. So these four lines, negative charges which we have drawn here, are four anions, and they are non-diffusible. That means they possess a charge, but they are not going to diffuse out of this membrane. To counter this negative charge, there would be positively charged ions moving in, and there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 positively charged ions inside. That means the ion movement which is taking place here, or influx of cations which is taking place here, is due to presence of some non-diffusible ions which are there inside the cell. And by this he gave an equilibrium which says that cations outside and anions outside are always equal to cations inside and anions inside. So we will write down that equation. It is written as cations outside, anions outside is equal to cations inside and anions inside. This is known as the Donan's equilibrium equation. So this is that equation. But the movement of particles or these elements is due to those non-diffusible ions which are present inside the cell. So this is all which is about passive. Active, we can just simply write one point and we will understand this. Active absorption is carrier mediated. It takes place with the help of carrier proteins, and these carrier proteins are going to help in transport of these elements. How would that happen? Suppose this is the plasma membrane and here is an extrinsic protein. This extrinsic protein binds to that element which is to be transported in, and this protein is going to move in and it is having that element attached to it. When it comes inside, it releases that element here and it would go back. That means these carrier proteins are actually carrying those elements into the cell, and for this movement energy is required. So active absorption is always with the help of carrier proteins, which are also known as channel proteins, with expenditure of ATP. So this is always with ATP. That means this is active, and these three are passive processes. So now these elements are taken in to the plant tissue or plant body through passive process or active process.